Hello everyone and welcome to Books in the World. I am your host, Madeline Miele Holt, and I am the Vice President of the Cape Cod Writers Center. We are delighted today to have as our guest Ruth Weiner, who has written two wonderful books. One is called The Mahjong Mavens of Boca, Raton, and the other is Veronica Recycled. But before we get into the books, let me just say that Books in the World is a production of the Cape Cod Writers Center. We film in the Cape Media Center in Dennisport, and we're delighted to have the help of the staff there in producing these shows, and as well as the technical staff on camera who are members of the Cape Cod Writers Center. We've been doing these book talks for 45 years. The show was started by the founder of the Cape Cod Writers Center. The Cape Cod Writers Center is now in its 60th year. This is the 60th anniversary. Shortly after that, the founder decided to utilize the cable TV capabilities and organize Books in the World to give authors, publishers, artists relating to book publishers, the opportunity to talk about their books that they would not have. So this show is to give people experience and exposure. We make these available on our website, capecodwriterscenter.org, as well as on YouTube. The authors can also use the links to publicize their own books. So welcome, Ruth. I totally admired your work, Ruth. We've known each other for some years, and I've had the opportunity to read some of your work in manuscript, but then you popped up and had some things published, and I was like, wow, these are really fun to read. So
thank you.
You're so welcome, and thank you for coming. So Veronica Recycled was the first one, is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
She's not new, though. She was born many, many years ago when I was in my 50s.
Okay.
In a short story.
In a short story.
Yeah, and then when I got into my 60s, I said, well, how's Veronica doing? And then when I got into my 70s, I said, you know, I better find out what she's doing now, or she'll never have a chance to do it. So I finally sat down and said, Veronica Recycled, that's, what is she doing now?
Okay, so, and the other one is the Mahjong Mavens of Boca Raton, which sounds funny, and it is, and humor is part of it, and we're going to talk about that. But why don't you tell us a little bit about each book?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, Veronica Recycled is about Veronica, obviously. She's a 72-year-old woman who, when she was in her 50s and did a lot of bicycling, because that's what she loves, she used to steal things. So she would go by a farm maybe, and there'd be a little gnome there, or there'd be a flag, and she'd conceal it and bring it up to this turret room in this big old Victorian home that she had. And that was her place of safety. That was her place of escape. And she could go up there and be up there for hours, and her husband and her son wouldn't bother her, and she just loved being there. But then her daughter-in-law, who's in real estate, says, I'm going to sell your house, Veronica, because you're losing your sight. And Johnny, her husband, her father-in-law, is going through Alzheimer's. Okay. So Veronica says, oh my God, my turret room. What's going to happen to my turret room? So she goes on a journey to return as many items as she can, not necessarily to the original owner, but along the way, a variety of very funny, quirky giveaways.
I'm laughing. It's so sweet. But we're going to talk about this in a little more depth, about the pathos of aging and the sadnesses as well as the funny parts of it. So go ahead and talk about Mahjong Mavens a bit so everyone will have a clue as to what these books are about.
Well, it started with a little seed of a thought when I read an article about bubbies getting arrested in Boca Raton because they were gambling. And there was a whole article on it. And it just made me laugh. So I said, okay, who are these bubbies who got... Bubby means grandmother, by the way. Just old ladies.
I was going to interject, and also, if we get a chance, we'll talk about the use of Yiddish in the book, which is fun also. But go ahead with the inspiration.
So there is a whole group of women in Boca Raton, and that's where that occurrence happened. The police came in, they raided them, and they said, you can't play here anymore. And everybody said, sure, we'll go play at my house. We'll play at my house. But there are 4 women who nobody wants to play with, nobody. And they're very different. They're very, very different. And they're forced to play together.
And they don't really want to either. They're not only people don't like them, they don't like each other.
They don't like each other, but they do like Mahjong.
They do like. Why don't we stop for a minute, because people might be curious as to what we have on the tables here. Can you just spend 1 minute talking about Mahjong?
Well, Mahjong is an old Chinese game, and the Chinese do not play it with cards. American women, most part, although my brother-in-law plays, he plays a good game too. Play Mahjong. If you play gin rummy, okay, it's a lot like gin rummy. You pick a tile, you throw a tile, you pick a tile, you throw a tile. But you have to adhere to specific hands already created by the Mahjong Association year by year by year. So every year you get a new card, and you try to make a hand. So this hand is actually the first one on the 2, 4, 6, 8s. And it's 3 flowers, and 2 2s, 2 4s, 3 6s, and I've used a joker in there, and 4 8s, and I've used a joker in there. And on the cover of my book, that's my joker. So that's the one that the...
I have to take a closer look.
Yeah.
They're very nice, very nicely made. Are there
sets
handed down in families? And,
oh, sure.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I have an old ivory one of my mother-in-law's.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's a fun game, and it's a gambling game. And it's a social game. Even though our 4 ladies aren't too social with each other, they still have to be civil.
Well, I'm going to jump in and mention that one of your characters goes on a Mahjong cruise at one point. This is out of Fort Lauderdale.
Sure.
Right. And I assume that's a thing that
Hundreds.
people do? Hundreds.
Hundreds. I mean, you can go online and you go Mahjong cruise, and like all of these things will pop up. I figure, okay, I'm going to go on a cruise. I'm going to take my book and say, you know, and just sell it on the cruise.
That would be a good idea.
Yeah.
It would be an easy sell. So let's see, where do we want to go with this? Well, first of all, I want to talk about the genre that you, I think, in a way are creating, or at least contributing to. It's not women's, not chick lit, because people are a little too old for this at this point.
Yeah, they're not chicks.
Love affairs, not so much. You know.
No, there's a little bit of love, but mostly friendship. It's all about friendship.
Yeah.
And both books are about ultimately self-actualization, realizing where you've been, what motivates you, where you're going next. They might be in their 70s and in their 80s. Bloom is in her 80s, and Mavens is just about approaching 80. They have years ahead of them in their own minds, and they want to dream about what's next.
Really?
You know?
Yeah,
and part of this is friendship is next. You know? And Veronica especially, she turns her house, this isn't a spoiler, she turns her house into the heart of Oaks Inn, and she invites other women who have problems into her home. That part isn't in there except for the reference to it, the allusion to it.
Yeah.
So there's plenty to do beyond your 70s and into your 80s and past that into your 90s. And I read recently you can live way past that.
Well, today in the New York Times is an article that says 90 is the new 60. So, yeah, but you know, they talk about the fact that Gloria Steinem is celebrating her 89th birthday, and she's going to Zambia. And,
Wow.
you know, and people are throwing themselves 90th birthday parties. And so, you know.
Well, you know something? We should.
We should.
Why not?
Okay.
And we should celebrate the moments. And I think that this is what both my books are, and another book that I have. You have to celebrate the moments when you get older. If you let them go by the wayside and you don't learn new things, why?
Well,
You know?
Yeah. Well, I mentioned to you that I thought that the movie 80 for Brady is in this genre. It's 4 women having madcap adventures and going to see the Super Bowl. And of course, Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski are in the movie.
Right, I saw it.
And you know, it's funny, but there's a lot of pathos in it as well. Not a lot, but if you think back also on Grace and Frankie with Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin.
You know, it's enough to keep things complex. You don't want something that's just superficial or frivolous. But I like the word that you use, madcap. I think that's a great word.
Okay.
Because when I think of the Mahjong Mavens, I think of, it's like a spree. You know, they're on a caper. That's the word. They're on a caper. So maybe that's kind of the genre. Older people going on capers to figure themselves out.
Yeah, and while they do that, they, in your story, they reflect on the sadnesses of their lives.
Yes.
One of them has a husband who rejected his daughter because she married a black man.
Correct.
One of them, and I don't want to give any spoilers, but he is somewhat dishonest in the theft of artworks.
Yes.
And so it's not just all fun, you know, and cute.
Well, I think the word complexity comes into it, because if you live to be into your 60s and your 70s, and you have a lot of layers. And that's what I tried to show, that these women and the men and the situations have layers to them. So you peel off one layer and there's something underneath, and another, and something underneath. And I've given each of the ladies enough time to reflect on that. Veronica too. And in my next book, it's about Millie, and she's 79. She's going to turn 80 in the book. And she has to reflect on, who am I? Where do I want to go next?
Speaking of this topic, we talked about you reading a paragraph about Bluma. And if you want to start by talking about each of the women.
Oh, sure.
Why don't you do that? Mention your creation of characters, and then we'll get back to the reflection on old age and issues like that. Okay?
So when I came up with the idea, you play Mahjong with 4. But if you're going to have conflict and friction in a story, you have to have, somebody, an instigator, an interloper. So I have an interloper who wants to either play Mahjong or get something over on my ladies. So I had to keep everybody straight. So how did I do that? So if I can show you my picture. Anyway, so we have Mavis, and Mavis is salty. Everything about her is salt. So she's coarse, she's gritty, she's, anything she says is salty.
Can I interject?
Yeah.
That she rides a pink Harley Davidson?
She rides a pink motorcycle, absolutely. And she drinks, she's a drinker, and she has to cope with that during the story. She smokes a stogie. You know, she's a man's woman, or even a man's woman, something like that. But she's tough and rough. And this is Gertrude. Now, Gertrude is bitter, all right? So I'm going with the food groups. So she is bitter. All right, and she's angry about a lot of things. This is Winnie, and Winnie is sour. Okay, everything about Winnie she looks at from a negative point of view, which is different than bitter. She's sour. And this is Bluma, and of course you have to have something sweet. So Bluma is sweet.
Okay.
And then there's Jane. Jane is umami. So she's the whole package. You know?
That's a taste reference. If people don't know that, it means it's like ketchup is a taste thing, and soy sauce, and
exactly. Yeah. They leave a lingering taste and a lingering flavor that we all want to achieve.
That is a wonderful way of describing her. That is great.
Yeah. So that's how I kept them straight.
That's good. I like that. Okay, so let's talk about Bluma and give the listeners a chance to hear your voice, or Bluma's voice, through you.
So this is Bobby Misa. Bluma worried about the money she was spending, especially since it was from Isaac's insurance policy. Her nest egg, she called it. She should be saving it for her grandsons, putting them through college, but surely she could use $1,000 for herself. She was 82 after all, and she didn't know how many spending years she would have left. Besides, Isaac invested in long-term care, and she was still paying the premiums. She decided to employ words she'd heard tossed around but never uttered. I'm worth it. I deserve it. I'm a good person.
Lovely.
Thank you.
We all need to remember those words and follow her example. But let's jump back to Veronica for a minute.
Well, Veronica has her mantra too.
Yes.
And Veronica's mantra is, I am enough, I have enough, I do enough. Because she's always been under her husband's thumb, under her son's disrespect. And she said, why, you know? And she's 72, and she loves still to ride her bicycle, but she's developing an eye problem. And she doesn't want to steal anymore. She wants to give back. And she feels at this point, I am enough, I have enough, I do enough. And she meets a man, and this man to her is a revelation, because he's kind, and he's good-hearted, and he has wonderful advice for her. And that was his mantra. I am enough, I have enough, I do enough.
So she works her way out of the situation she's in, and she figures out a way to cope.
Exactly.
I found it pretty interesting to be at that age and looking back at your marriage, and it happens in both books, where the marriages were not happy. And that's a particular sadness about old age, to have to look back at that. Is that something I happen to know you have a happy marriage, and I'm not asking you to talk about your life, but why did you decide to explore that?
Well, I think it goes along with being an individual. I mean, these ladies, we are individuals before we become a team, before we have a partner. And we lose that. You're married 50 years, I'm married almost 54 years. And you lose that individuality, that voice. And how do you recapture that? You know, you have to be still inside yourself, figure out who you are, and whether the marriage is good or not good, you move forward.
Did you ever think of writing about a marriage like in that situation where the husband is not dead? That were the one. Well,
Johnny's not dead.
Yeah, but he's got Alzheimer's.
Yeah, I guess.
Well, that would be another kind of challenge.
Not yet, but you give me an idea.
Being in your 70s or 80s and wondering, is this all there is, or what am I going to do next? And you know, there's a lot of things that I enjoyed, but I don't want to give spoilers. The young woman who helps them all out, and they are all vying for her affection and attention. And Jane. You can say a little bit about Jane. But it does bring up something that I think I had thought about, is sexuality. And we don't have to go back to Jane, because there is a spoiler there, but the fact that these women are thinking about sexuality at this point in a way that they seem, you know, by today's standards, they're a little clueless, if you want to know the truth. I know.
I think that's intentional on my part.
Okay.
Because in a story, people have to develop, they have to change, you have to have an arc. So each woman, especially because of Jane, each woman comes to realize her own sexuality and the sexuality and the equal gender things we're talking about today in 2023, that they should know. They should know better.
Yeah.
So it reveals to them something that they didn't know.
They did not know, right? But they adapted nicely.
Exactly.
They really did.
And I think that's the point. You know, as we get older, we let some things go. You know, something that might have bothered us as a younger person, and say, okay, I can accept that now. All right, I can move forward with that. And all of them have done that. They've said, I'm not necessarily mature, because I don't think Mavis will ever be mature. But
She's the
wild one.
She's the salt.
She's the salt.
She's the salt.
Yeah.
With the Harley.
Yeah. But we have to come to terms with who we are and what we're doing in the moment, in the day, and make it worthwhile.
From the writing point of view, is there ever a time where you say, wait a minute, I have too many characters? Or do they just pop into your head? Or
Yes, they pop into my head.
Pop into your head.
Well, you know, the fun part about it is, you know, I'm a bicycler. I have been pretty much my whole life. And as I cycle, things pop up. You know, there might be a person that I meet along the way, and I can give that person a story. So while I was writing Veronica especially, I didn't know what she was going to find. I didn't know who she was going to give back to. And so when she came upon a church, who's in that church? So she met somebody in the church that she could help. She came along a pond. who's at that pond? And I didn't know. So I think a lot of the fun in my writing, anyway, is that I didn't know. I mean, when I go back and revise, then of course I know, and I have to make it a little more palatable to the reader. But my first time out, it's discovery for me.
No,
it's
you
fun.
aren't the first author who's told me that.
Yeah.
I love this question. I love talking to authors about how the characters are waiting for them. In the morning, they got to sit down and write because the characters want to be heard,
That's
for
right.
example.
That's right.
You know.
Well, like Veronica. I mean, she was with me in my 50s. And here she popped up again. She said, I want to live.
Have you ever thought about writing about men or adding some male? Well, not that you have added some male characters.
I have men as characters, but they're not my concern.
Okay.
My concern is womanhood and self-actualization of women.
Well, that's good. You and I talked about the fact that there are not so many, or I didn't think there were so many books that dealt with men at this age. And you came up with a few that you
I
thought
did.
do.
Yeah. Frederick Bachman, he
Yeah.
has some wonderful stories about older gentlemen. And the Osmond, I think his name is
Richard Osman.
Richard Osman.
Yeah.
He has like the Thursday Murder Club, and
Yeah.
there's two very, very viable, fabulous men and two wonderful women characters.
Yeah, they're good. And then I mentioned Lucky Hank, which is a TV show right now that is based on a Richard Russo novel.
Okay.
But that man is younger. He's in his midlife crisis. He's not in the 70, 80 range, but it's great. These books really help us a lot. I mean, they help us to think about what we can be thinking about or should be thinking about, and
Right.
really, give us some thought while giving us some good thoughts while having a good time with the books.
True, and revealing some truths.
Yeah.
I think in every story that you read, if you don't find a truth, either about yourself or about a character, then it's time wasted.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we haven't talked about the use of Yiddish in Mahjong Mavens. Now, I happen to have been around a lot of Yiddish in my life, but not everybody who's our age knows Yiddish. You know, some do, some, but not usually. How did you decide to focus on this?
Well, it came about because the original title was the Verbissenes, and that's Verbissener, and that means sourpusses. And that was my original title, and I was going to go with it. And these women, and I grew up in a home where my grandmother spoke Yiddish, and she was a champion swearer of Yiddish. You know, not just the normal, you know, you're a good girl. You know, it's like, you're a Verstunkene. So I grew up with that sense of one joy, because Yiddish is kind of funny and fun. They take a variety, like don't huck me a chinik, you know, don't play with my brain.
I have to comment, I always thought it's very onomatopoetic.
Oh, sure.
Say some of those words again.
Verkackte, Verstunkene, Babameister, Schöne Mädela, which means a pretty face.
Okay.
Yeah, there are good words too.
Schöne is
and then
nice
there's all kinds of swears, and they're wonderful. You know, they talk to your tongue. You know?
Yeah.
So the ladies are all Jewish, and they've all grown up in the 40s, the 30s, the 40s. So it's reasonable that their parents, their grandparents, would have come from another country. And the basic language of most Eastern European Jews, anyway, and any Germanic area, was Yiddish.
Yeah.
And there's a revival now too.
There is a revival
of Yiddish in this country, yes. Yeah. And what I love about my publisher actually took my words and put them at the beginning of each chapter, and I had made the translation for each chapter. So each chapter has a different name. Like I said, Kinohara, that's a knock on wood, Kinohara, or Schlamazel, everybody, you know, everybody knows that word.
I don't know it.
Oh, that was, it was in an old television program. Schlamael, Schlamazel, with the three, anyway.
The Three Stooges?
No, it was Three's Company.
Okay.
Three's Company, I think. Mashugana.
Yeah, that one everyone
Yeah, so I tried
knows.
for words that people would know. Rachmanis means compassion when you love somebody else, or you have empathy.
Yeah, yeah. Did you spend a lot of time in Boca Raton?
No,
No,
no. The inception of that was that raid, that police raid.
Okay.
And so that's what got me. I've spent time in Florida, but not
Yeah.
excessively.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we're coming to the end of our time.
Oh.
It's been a lot of fun.
Yes,
and
thank you.
Congratulations on everything you've achieved. And you've mentioned what you're doing next. Could you just you talked about, which one did you already mentioned?
Well, maybe your audience can help me with this.
Okay.
So the story that I have is about Millie.
Yes.
And she is turning 80, and she wants to not live in a nursing home anymore.
Okay.
So she escapes.
Okay.
So my title was Millie Got Woke. But now, with this word woke, it's almost like taboo.
Yeah,
So if anybody can kind of come up with a title that means the same as Millie came out of her shell, she escaped, she became a whole person again,
Okay.
and not use the word woke, that would be wonderful.
Good question. And I happen to know, and then we're going to absolutely have to say goodbye to our audience, that your other book that you are working on has to do with the teenage subject.
Yes.
And I will just say that you have this young girl creating characterization for each letter of the alphabet.
Right.
Which I'm going to leave it at that, and the audience can follow you on your website and look you up and go to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Abe Books, and wherever you buy books, and find these books, and you'll certainly enjoy them. And if you've enjoyed this interview, you will be able to see it at the Cape Cod Writers Center website, on YouTube, and on the Cape Media's website as well. So thank you for listening, and enjoy the new books by Ruth. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.